Judges 6, verses 11 through 16 and 28 through 30. The call of Gideon. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty warrior." Gideon answered him, "But sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has cast us off and given us in the hand of Midian." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. I hereby commission you." He responded, "But sir, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike down the Midianites, every one of them." Gideon destroys the altar of Baal. When the townspeople rose early in the morning, the altar of Baal was broken down, and the sacred pole beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar that had been built. So they said to one another, "Who has done this?" After searching and inquiring, they were told, "Gideon, son of Joash, did it." Then the townspeople said to Joash, "Bring out your son so that he may die, for he has pulled down the altar of Baal and cut down the sacred pole beside it."
Israel would only take credit away from me, saying, "My own hand has delivered me." Now, therefore, proclaim this in the hearing of the troops: whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home. Thus Gideon sifted them out. 22,000 returned, and 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "The troops are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them out for you there. When I say, 'This one shall go with you,' he shall go with you. And when I say, 'This one shall not go with you,' he shall not go." So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, "All those who lap the water with their tongues, as a dog laps, you shall put to one side. All who kneel down to drink, putting their hands to their mouths, you shall put to the other side." The number of those who lapped was 300. But all the rest of the troops knelt down to drink water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 that lapped, I will deliver you, and give the Midianites into your hand. Let all the others go to their homes." So he took the jars of the troops from their hands and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel back to their own tents, but retained the 300. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So Gideon and the 100 who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp, to the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just set the watch. And they blew their trumpets and smashed the jars that were in their hands. So the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars, holding in their left hands the torches, and in their right hands the trumpets to blow. And they cried, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Every man stood in his place all around the camp, and all the men in the camp ran. They cried out and fled. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Bethshittah toward Zerah, as far as the border of Abel-Meholah at Tabbath. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites.
Brothers and sisters in Christ, this is the word of the Lord. This is a story, the story of Gideon, that many of us remember. I remember as a child hearing the story about Gideon winnowing his army from 30-some thousand down to 300. I remember the stories of fleece-lined tests, and I remember stories of jars breaking and riots happening. The story of Gideon in the Bible, though, is complicated. More complicated than what you and I probably realize. And what I mean by that is it's complicated because Hebrew is such a fascinating language. Hebrew is a language that has very few words, so few words can have a lot of meanings. One example that I will use is that Hebrew has no real word for anger. So you have to come up with things that would make somebody angry. And then you would just translate it anger. So for example, the Bible never really says God is angry. It will say things like God burned in his nostrils. Right? And that teaches us that God is angry. Or the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, really is don't put other gods in my face. And because of this, sometimes it's hard to figure out how to translate things. Now, a couple of weeks ago with Ehud, we looked at a passage that the NIV said one thing, and the NRSV said another, and the New King James said another. And the reason is because there were a variety of levels of comfort with the biblical editors of what to put in there about that topic. This week it's something different. This week, though, it's a choice that biblical editors have to make, and the choice that they make has a large impact on the story. And the choice that they have to make is which soldiers did Gideon choose? Or should I say, which soldiers did God choose? If you read the NIV at home, it would say that it would make it appear that at the end of the story, you have a number of people who bend down and pick up the water and bring it to their faces, and other people who stick their faces into the water and lap like dogs. And in the NIV, God says that there are 300 who picked up water and brought it to their faces. And it's those 300 that God chose. In the New Revised Standard Version, it will say that there were 300 who bent down and stuck their face in the water. And it's God who separated them and chose those. So did God choose those that brought water to their face, or did God choose those that put their face down to the water? That's the choice that biblical scholars have to make, because in Hebrew, you can't tell. There's no way to know. And I remember as a child reading the NIV, I remember I was taught that Gideon chose people, and God chose people who brought water up to their faces because they would have been the best soldiers, that they would have been able to, they understood that even when you get water, you never take your eyes off the enemy. And you bring up water to your face so you can constantly look at your surroundings. And so really what God chose was like 300 of Israel's special ops people, kind of like Jason Saul at infantry officers school right now. Those are the people you want fighting. And that makes the most sense, right? That's who you want fighting, are the people who know how to fight. The NRSV and other translations, though, take a different approach. They say that God chose the people who stuck their face down into the water, who lapped like dogs, and God says, it's you that I'm going to choose, the worst 300 soldiers. I'm going to deliver the Midianites into your hands with you. So which one is it? Well, the real answer, of course, is we don't know, but we can take a few stabs and see what God is trying to teach us in this. First of all, the person of Gideon is an interesting person. He is somebody who is rather weak. His weakness is prevalent throughout. He is somebody who is hiding at night. He's taking it, according to the scripture, he's taking his wheat and he's moving it through the threshing floor in the winepress in a small cave. Usually this would have been done out in the open by animals, where you would throw your crops out on the ground, and then with a sled you would pull it behind a donkey, and through that you would separate the wheat from the chaff. But he's doing it in a cave for wine presses because he doesn't want the Midianites to see him and tax him on his wheat. He does it at night. He's somebody who God calls to do something. Although we skipped over that part, many of you know that when God calls him to do something, to go and attack the Midianites, on 2 different occasions, he demands a test from God. He's not somebody who hears God and immediately obeys, but he's somebody who hears God and needs some proof of what God is going to do. He obviously has some sort of self-esteem problems, because when God says to him, here is what you are going to do, his response is, who am I? For my tribe is the least among the clans of Israel, and my family the least family in our tribe. I am nobody from a family of nobodies, from a region of nobodies. He's not some mighty warrior that God sees, that says, I am able to see the injustice that's happening from the Midianites, and I am going to do something about it. No, he sees himself as somebody who is worthless, as somebody who is not worthy of doing anything great. I am unworthy. I am somebody who, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. But you notice, that's how he sees himself. But God approaches Gideon through an angel, and notice what God sees. The Lord is with you, you mighty warrior. See, God looks, and when God looks upon us, he sees who we are capable of being, not who we necessarily are. For God is somebody who took the time to create Gideon in his own image. He's somebody who God decided was worth creating. And the same is true for each of us. How many of us don't look in the mirror and see our faults? How can I deserve this? Or who am I to do something? I don't have this gift. I don't have this gift. Who am I to do whatever it is to be done? How could God use somebody like me? And it's to us, like Gideon, that God says, the Lord is with you, you mighty warrior. Gideon is faithful then, and the Lord commissions him to do something. He doesn't commission him to do something great. He commissions him to do something small. He doesn't say, hello, Gideon, I'm an angel of the Lord. I want you to go defeat the foreign power, the Midianites. What he says is, Gideon, I commission you to tear down the altar of Baal. Just push some rocks over. Cut down the pole of Asherah. That's all I want you to do. But in doing that, although it's a small act, you are saying something great. It's a test to say, are you going to worship Yahweh or are you going to worship Baal? Now, obviously, Baal worship was around in those days, and it was popular in those days. In fact, if you look and if you listen to what Lee read, what is Gideon's other name? Jerubbaal. Baal is in his name. Now, some people are really uncomfortable with that, and so they come up with this etymology, we call it, that it will say is the one who contends with Baal. But really, if we look at the ancient languages, Gideon's name, Jerubbaal, means let Baal be great. He grew up in a family that worshiped Baal. He grew up in a community that worshiped Baal, that had an altar to Baal, that had a long pole as a symbol as an idol to Asherah, Baal's wife. He grew up in that, and God says to him, I want you to abandon who you were. I want you to abandon your family at some level. I want you to abandon your village, and I want you to follow me. Go cut down that pole and destroy that altar. In Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, does it. It is something small, and yet it's so profound. It is just pushing over some rocks and maybe pushing or cutting over a log. But what it's saying is that I trust Yahweh and I follow God alone. But do you notice when he does it? He does it at night when nobody is watching. So there is this idea of, I'm going to follow you, God, but I don't want everybody to know it yet. You know, he has right to be scared. For the text says the next morning when they realized it was done, the crowd was angry and they wanted to kill Gideon for it. But because Gideon was faithful in the small things, God then entrusted him to do something great. And that is, if you're willing to do this, I now know you are willing to follow me and you trust me, and now go defeat those Midianites. And what I love, and we've seen this before, is Gideon has 33,000 troops at his disposal. Now, what army commander, right, would go into battle with 33,000 troops and then say, I think there's too many. I think there's too many. I think we can do this with a smaller army. So he says, any of you who are scared, go home. If you don't want to go to battle, go home. And thousands left. And then he winnows it down more. And finally, we get to the test of drinking the water. And the question, they go from 33,000 to 300. And the question is it this 300 a special operations group that will come and defeat the Midianites? Or does God choose the worst 300 soldiers that were there to do his work? If it is the way the NIV reads it, then the message is God uses our skills, who we are, to do things for him. These were soldiers, others are writers, others are bakers, others are whatever, and God will use us in whatever we're capable of to work in his kingdom. But if it's the other way, which to be honest is the way that I lean, if it's the other way, then what it says is that we are reminded again that it's not us who go and fight. It's not us that are out there trying to win this world for Christ, but it is God himself who goes before us and who fights on our behalf. It is God who can bring this community, God who can bring this country, God who can bring this world back under his kingdom. For there are many times that as humans we look around and we say, my problems are too big. I just can't solve them. We look at the problems within our community, and for those of us who are engaging issues of like housing, for lower income housing, we look and we realize that there are thousands of people in our own county that do not have and cannot find affordable housing, and thousands need homes. In one of the wealthiest counties in Michigan, thousands need a place to live, and it looks overwhelming. For those of us who have tension in our relationships or tensions at work, and the problems seem too big to bear, they seem beyond us. To me, this passage reminds us that they are too big for us, and they are too much for us to bear, but they are not too big for God, and they are not too big for him to bear. You see, we get this theme. Who does God choose? My clan is the weakest among Manasseh, and I am the weakest of my clan. And God says, perfect. Because then there won't be any doubt that it's not you who is going to deliver Israel, but it's me who is going to deliver Israel. And so I ask us the question. We don't have movers and shakers necessarily around here. You don't have the coolest pastor in the neighborhood. We don't have the fanciest building. We don't have the awesomest things, but what we have are people who are faithful to God. And if we stay faithful to God, just as God delivered the enemies into Israel's hands then, God will do amazing things through us now. Not because of who we are, but because of who God is. Isn't that what we just saw in the sacrament of baptism? That of course Gideon needed to respond. Of course we need to respond, both to salvation but also to God's call in our lives. We need to respond. We need to work. We need to do what we are capable of doing. But in all of that, we are reminded that it is not us, but it is God at work within us that will do these things. Now, what we have to be careful of, though, when we talk like that, is this idea of, then let us sit back and watch God at work. No. Gideon is willing to follow God